Welcome to today's Explainer. If you have ever experienced a sudden closed door, a hard no, or a crushing professional setback, well, you know the pain isn't just in your head. It literally reverberates through your entire body. Today we're exploring Chapter 8 of Stephen Kruk's book, The Living Signature of God. We're going to unpack a really fascinating framework for dismantling the agonizing cycle of self-rejection. We'll be looking at the psychology, the neurology, and the spiritual framework Kruk proposes to help us break free from the invisible prison of our own minds. Let's get right into it. Okay, let's dive into this. Kruk sets the stage with this incredibly powerful quote, establishing that the actual moment of rejection, it isn't the final act. Instead, it's merely the opening shot of an inner battle. The source material outlines that the second we're rejected, we are immediately thrust into a choice. We can either spiral down into a cycle of self-destruction, internalizing that rejection as our absolute truth, or we can use that exact same pain as a catalyst for profound self-discovery. Now, I want you to think about the last time you were deeply rejected. Why does a simple string of words in an email or a super brief conversation feel like a literal physical blow? Well, Kruk uses this incredibly visceral metaphor in the text. He describes the sensation as if your aorta, the main artery of your heart, is being violently squeezed. It's this suffocating feeling where everything just comes to a complete standstill. It takes your breath away, makes your heart freeze. And here's the thing, it's not an overreaction. It is a profoundly human, profoundly physical response. And this brilliantly illustrates where things get truly mind-blowing. From a purely neurological standpoint, your brain actually cannot tell the difference between a broken bone and a broken heart. When we experience physical pain, the brain activates the anterior cingulate cortex and the insula. But according to the source material, social rejection activates those exact same brain regions. The brain interprets rejection as a primitive physical alarm. It's a survival mechanism, reminding us of our fundamental need for social connection. So that physical, suffocating pain, it is entirely 100% real.
Section 1. Bart's downward spiral, the anatomy of an emotion.
To really ground these abstract concepts, the author introduces us to a 32-year-old graphic designer named Bart who desperately sought human approval through his work. Let's walk through his timeline here. He spent months painstakingly preparing his portfolio to apply for his absolute dream job at this prestigious creative quality agency in Amsterdam. He poured his blood, sweat, and tears into this single goal. And the initial interviews? They were fantastic. Super enthusiastic, highly positive. He felt he was incredibly close to securing his dream. But then, the email arrived. It was polite, but absolutely crushing. They had unfortunately chosen another candidate whose profile was a, quote, slightly better match. Just like that, the door slammed completely shut. But the real damage, as Kruk points out, isn't the email itself. No, it's the psychological fallout that immediately follows. Just look at these cascading impacts on Bart's life. He woke up every day with this heavy, suffocating feeling. His creative energy, which used to just flow naturally, dried up entirely. He started sleeping in late, avoiding his friends out of sheer shame, dodging any questions about his application. He was totally trapped in endless rumination. The rejection had successfully infiltrated every single aspect of his daily life.
Section 2. Unmasking the old voice. So when that pain sets in, it creates a vacuum in our minds. And stepping right into that vacuum is a deeply destructive, conditioned inner dialogue that the book calls the old voice. This right here is the first lie this voice tells. For Bart, it didn't just sound like some generic negative thought. It perfectly mimicked a past critic. It sounded exactly like his old, highly critical art teacher whispering, "See, Bart, you're just not good enough. You knew that all along, didn't you?" It takes one isolated professional setback and expands it into this massive, definitive judgment on his overall worth.
And then the second suffocating lie just piles right on, this time echoing Bart's perfectionist father. All those hours you put into it, for nothing. You're a failure. This is the exact moment the big transition happens. The external agency merely rejected Bart's application, sure, but it is Bart's own mind, the old voice, that rejects Bart. It transforms a simple rejection into a paralyzing, holistic self-rejection. Suddenly, every line he drew, every color he chose at work was being judged by these internal voices as boring and completely unoriginal.
So the crucial point is understanding the actual mechanics of rumination. The text defines this as an endless, exhausting mental loop of replaying the event, constantly searching for a why or what could have been done differently. Neurologically speaking, Bart's hyperactive amygdala, the fear center of the brain, has completely drowned out his rational thought. Rationally, Bart knows tons of successful people face rejection, but the emotional pain keeps him trapped in the past, completely stalling his future.
Section 3. The Divine Detour and the Turning Point. To break this cycle, the source material pivots to a fascinating spiritual framework for cognitive restructuring. Central to this framework is the concept of the divine detour. The author argues that a closed door is rarely a dead end. Instead, within the spiritual worldview, it's seen as a purposeful, even protective redirection. It shifts the perspective entirely, right? What if that rejection wasn't a failure at all, but a necessary detour leading you toward a path that is much more aligned with your ultimate true calling? Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sharp contrast between two entirely different paradigms of living. If you operate in the paradigm of constantly seeking human approval, your self-worth is incredibly fragile. It's entirely based on your performance, which inevitably leads to exhaustion and fear, just exactly like we saw with Bart. However, Crook's framework proposes shifting to the paradigm of God's acceptance. This acceptance is described as absolute and unchanging. It isn't based on your achievements or appearance, which the book says results in unconditional peace and a truly stable self-image. The author essentially describes a process we could honestly call spiritual CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy infused with theology. By consciously replacing the negative internal dialogues of the old voice with what the text calls absolute divine truth, you are actively reframing your thoughts. And physically, this process actually engages the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational decision-making, and effectively calms down that fear-driven amygdala. So it physically rewires the brain for resilience, using spiritual conviction as the core anchor. Section 4. Actionable takeaways for finding freedom. Let's move to and see how this builds into specific, practical tools for the inner engineer, the person taking charge of their own mental construction site, so to speak, to escape this prison of the mind. The book lays out a 4-step process. First, acknowledge the pain, but absolutely resist internalization. Actually say aloud, this pain is real, but it doesn't define my worth. Second, unmask the lying voices. Stop and ask yourself, are these thoughts actually true? Third, actively replace those lies with absolute truth, filling your thoughts with unconditional acceptance. And finally, fourth, focus on the process over the result. Embrace the detours, trusting that a closed door might actually be protecting you or redirecting you to something so much better. And to accomplish that third step, replacing the lies, the book provides a few specific biblical anchors. Psalm 27:10 is used to combat the primal fear of abandonment, highlighting unwavering care even if your closest relationships fail. Romans 8:38-39 serves as the ultimate declaration of indestructible love, asserting that literally no human rejection can break that bond. And Jeremiah 29:11 is presented as a reminder that the ultimate plan is for a hopeful future, meaning a rejection is simply a pivot, not your final destination. So we want to leave you with this provocative thought straight from the core of Stephen Crook's analysis. Think about the last door that closed in your face. Think about the exact moment your aorta constricted. What if, instead of viewing it as a crushing defeat or some definitive measure of your inadequacy, you actively chose to reframe it? What if that very rejection wasn't a failure at all, but a purposeful, protective redirection toward your true calling? It's an incredibly powerful paradigm shift, one that challenges us to view our darkest professional and personal moments not as the end of the road, but as a divine detour. Thanks for joining us for this explainer, and we'll see you next time.